Good afternoon and welcome to the concluding press conference of today's informal video conference of EU ministers responsible for internal market and industry, which was the first one held under the German presidency. We will begin with statements by the German Minister for Economic Affairs and Energy, Peter Altmaier, who chaired the meeting from Berlin today, and EU Commissioner for Internal Market, Thierry Breton, who's here with me in Brussels. The floor will afterwards be open for your questions, and you can speak and listen in 3 languages, English, French, and German. And without much further ado, I would now like to pass the floor to Minister Altmaier in Berlin. Herr Minister, Sie haben das Wort.
Immediately, let me make some clarification first. You will perhaps miss on the agenda a couple of points previously discussed. We had hoped to organize this meeting as a formal council meeting in Brussels with physical presence of the member states over a whole day. This was unfortunately not possible because the pandemic is back in Europe, in most of our countries and in many regions. Therefore, we've decided in the last days to organize it as a video conference, and that means we had to be as efficient as possible, and we have decided to postpone especially the debate on industrial policy to the next official council meeting. We have decided also to come back on a later occasion on small and medium-sized enterprises issue, but I can reassure you and confirm that on all these issues we are in excellent cooperation with the European Commission and its services. Ich freue mich sehr, dass ich
I'm very pleased that I can welcome my friend Thierry Breton to this press conference. He and Commissioner Vestager were present at our video conference this morning. We focused on the issue of how we can deepen the single market and prepare it for the future. This is very important because the European Council on the 24th and 25th of September will address the question of strengthening the single market, and we wanted to give some impetus to that upcoming debate. This conference was extremely successful. There was a high level of awareness in all the member states about the great significance of a smoothly functioning, strong internal market. If we are going to overcome the COVID-19 crisis, we will need such a strong internal market. The economies of the member states of the European Union are dependent on each other. They're interdependent. And when the lockdown came in April and various supply chains were slowed down or interrupted, the negative economic consequences became apparent. Many member states complained that although national measures may be necessary, we need to prevent the interruption of supply chains in the future. And therefore, we have a task that we must address for the future. We need this deeper and more future-ready single market, and this particularly in the context of the fact that we face many challenges due to the pandemic. Here I'm thinking about the Green Deal. This is going to be necessary if we are to meet our climate change targets. If we want to bring this Green Deal, to make it a reality, then we will need a competitive European economy. And to that end, we must have a smoothly functioning single market which gives impetus to all the individual member state markets. We need a strong single market because we face challenges in the form of protectionism and other market problems in some of our member states. We also face challenges in the area of digital innovation. We need to be competitive in this area. Europe has the foundations that it needs to strengthen its economic position, but we do need to continue deepening the single market. We also discussed the need for the better enforcement of single market provisions and the need to remove the remaining barriers. We also discussed points from the European Commission's March package of measures. And in the area of services, we have a great deal of single market potential that we must exploit. And we're going to address this issue as the German presidency continues. We want to make things easier for small and medium-sized enterprises within the single market, in part by providing better information. And as I've always pointed out, free and fair competition requires the appropriate conditions. That's going to be of continuing importance to all of us. And I also thanked the Commission for its support of the Member States during the first wave of the pandemic. Some measures had to be adapted to the situation when it came to state aid. This was necessary to ensure that the economy could continue to function. Of course, we want a phasing out and a return to normal measures as quickly as possible. We need to be able to respond in a flexible way, even when we face serious challenges. We are going to need support for companies and for employees. But where recovery has already begun, we will gradually return to the enforcement of normal measures. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an overview of our discussions this morning. We had a shared understanding of solidarity, and we also were all optimistic about our ability to face these challenges. On next Monday, we will be holding an informal meeting of trade ministers here in Berlin, and we'll also be looking forward to the Council of Energy Ministers and other formations. And that was a brief account of this morning's conference, and I'm looking forward to hearing from my friend, Commissioner Thierry Breton.
I would now like to pass the floor to Commissioner Breton. Monsieur le Commissaire, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Minister Altmaier, my dear Peter. I would like to tell that, of course, we have been able to have this extremely important meeting today on a virtual basis, which was unfortunate, but next time hopefully we will be able to see each other. And by the way, Peter, I'm very happy to be able to see you as early as Sunday evening in Berlin, and also Monday for this important informal meeting when I will join with the trade ministers. Alors, donc, je voudrais...
So, I'd just like to say a few words for my part as well. I'd like to talk about the content of the meeting. It lasted some time, And in the course of that, it was clear that all ministers value the great importance of our internal market. I would like to thank Peter for organising the meeting. It was a very opportune time to hold the meeting. This is at a time when there are more and more outbreaks of the pandemic occurring in Europe, here and there. The pandemic is not over. Clearly, we need to get ourselves organised so that we can try to continue to work to live as well as we can, ensure that our economy is affected as little as possible, and ensure that our people can continue to live and work over the next few months. What is important is that we learn the lessons of what we've just been through, what we've lived through over the last few months. We need to learn those lessons and prepare ourselves for what comes. And I hope that it will last as short a time as possible. I'm sure all of us do. Now, I don't think we should be complacent about what happened. At the very beginning of the pandemic, there was a bit of every man for himself going on in the single market, and we can't hide from that. I think in practically every continent, not just our own, there were these difficulties. So, of course, people were totally taken aback, and borders were closed pretty quickly. But very soon after that, and perhaps because of the strength of our internal market, we realised very quickly that we had to open up the borders again for our value chain to continue to work properly. It was vital, as Peter said, that all subcontractors could continue to provide products and supplies to the rest of the European Union. So within a very short period of time, maybe a fortnight or so, the borders gradually opened up again. And as Peter said, you and the Member States have been active and the Commission has been active, and eventually the situation got back a little bit more to normal. But of course we have to learn from this, and the Commission will be talking to each of the ministers. I've also written a letter to all ministers to remind them of what we did. And it's very important that we try to avoid this happening again. Even if there are clusters, outbreaks, we must try not to shut down borders automatically. We have to coordinate as much as possible before we take any action. Now, what I will say is that I was pleased to see that all the ministers unanimously said how important the internal market is. It is a common good for us all, and it is one of the most exceptional achievements that Europe has chalked up. I think they've all said it, and it's clear that everybody's absolutely convinced of how significant the internal market is. Now, it's precisely because we have to ensure continuity and that we recognise the strengths of our internal market that we have to take the action we're taking. So, obviously, the Commission, all Member States, but of course, at the outset, this was a Franco-German initiative. There was a proposal for this very ambitious recovery plan of 750 billion euros. It was very important that we drew the right conclusions, that we showed that the single market has to show solidarity. It was very important that no Member State should feel left out. Now, some Member States felt more under attack than others, more affected than others, but it was very important that the single market showed solidarity. And it's important for the Commission that there is no distortion in the single market simply because one country is more affected than others. This is what the principle behind it was: solidarity, keeping the single market going. That was the real driving force behind this decision. The decision that was taken by Member States on the proposal from the Commission to propose a recovery plan. Now, obviously, in September, we're looking at all these issues, and Member States have really urged the Commission to draw the appropriate conclusions from what we've just lived through so that we can improve on how the single market works for the future. Now, of course, this is partly because we have to prepare for the next phase, the follow-up, so that we don't have any further problems in the next phases. But we also have to draw conclusions so that we can improve the single market in the long term. This is a never-ending battle for the single market. We've gone through a particular event. We've learnt lessons. We've drawn conclusions. We have now to implement those. And this is very much what you've asked me to do in the Commission. And that's what I'm going to be working very hard upon. We have to draw the right conclusions, learn the lessons, and strengthen the single market for the future. And I think it's a very positive thing that all Member States' representatives unanimously agreed on that this morning. Now, we obviously also discussed the recovery plan. The recovery plan has to help the single market make our whole economy more competitive in Europe. Sadly, many firms have suffered during the pandemic and are going to continue to suffer. We also know that investment failed to materialize, even though it had been planned originally. So we do intend to try to pump in the investment that has not come to light over these last few months. And President von der Leyen has stressed three key areas: the green policy, the Green Deal. The Commission is going to ensure that 37% of the recovery funds are dedicated to the Green Deal. But we also need to improve on the digital transition, the digital revolution that's absolutely vital for our firms to be competitive. Just like to remind you that 20% of the recovery funds will be allocated to these digital projects in Member States. 20% of the funds will have to be used for that. We also have to strengthen the resilience of the single market. We've said that sometimes we were too dependent, too vulnerable, too dependent particularly on supplies from certain countries. So it's very important that we learn lessons from that so that we keep up the competitiveness and indeed the autonomy of our single market. Now, we talked about a number of projects. We call them flagship projects. There are three for the Green Deal, a green economy, hydrogen, other projects. There are three for the digital transition, on data. Peter's been working with Bruno Le Maire on a project called Gaia X, and that's going to be extended. That's going to be one of the projects which will allow our companies to have real mastery control over their data via clouds. There's our calculation potential, our ability to calculate all this data and put it together. And we also have the services industry, very important, because services require this digitalization as well. We mustn't have patches in our continent that are not reached by connectivity. So connectivity is also very important so that everybody has access. So to sum up, we have to learn the lessons from what's happened. We've seen how important the single market is in demonstrating solidarity with those who've suffered. I think we're in a better position now to draw the right conclusions, be more resilient, and be prepared for other crises which might occur in the years to come. Obviously, this is an unheard of crisis that we're living through. I think we have thought through the consequences. We had a very interesting discussion under Peter's chairmanship this morning with all the ministers. Thank you.
Monsieur le Commissaire, thank you very much. I will now open the floor for your questions. Please raise your hand virtually and state the name and the media you represent. Also, just a little correction, we do have more interpretation. So in addition to German, French and English, we also have Dutch, Spanish and Italian. Thank you very much. So please raise your hand in the Zoom conference. I see journalists present, but I'm not sure whether there's an issue with raising the hand. Well, you're still invited to ask questions, but if I don't see any, I would like to thank everyone for joining us online today, for joining us for this press conference following the informal video conference of EU ministers responsible for internal market and industry. Thank you very much to Berlin, to Minister Altmaier, and here to Commissioner Breton. And I will conclude this press conference. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir et à bientôt, Thierry, à Berlin le dimanche.
Goodbye to everyone, and looking forward to seeing you on Sunday in Berlin, Thierry. I'm looking forward to it too, says Mr. Breton.